Hello everyone, welcome back to the Educatedcollins Snap channel. How you doing? So today I've got another deck breakdown for you today. This is actually one of my more favorite decks to play these days. It's gonna be Hela Casino. So without further ado, let's break it down. So Hela Casino obviously revolves around the card Hela, which is a pool 3 card, and you just kind of want to be using discard tools, whatever units that you have to discard really powerful cards. I'll call them bombs, I'll call them win conditions. They're just really powerful 6 drops, usually, that you can bring back to the board after you play Hela. So that's the main strategy. Discard a bunch of your cards and then hope it's you don't discard Hela. You play Hela and you bring them all back to your board. Usually a very strong strategy if you can pull it off. So here we have the standard list. This is, I believe, the same list from the recent meta tier list for April. But it has just all the tools that you need to really have a lot of success. A lot of discards. You've got the Summoner Jubilee. You've got the last chance dis effort with the Ghost Rider to bring a card back, and then you have a lot of powerful cards to resummon with Marvel, Doctor Doom, Odin, Infinaut, Death. Really, really solid list here. So let's get started with the main piece, the queen of this archetype. We've got Hela. She is very core. She's basically your only win con. Obviously, you can win without playing Hela at all, but it's definitely a lot easier to do well by playing this particular unit. It just brings back all your discarded bombs. Next up, we have Ghost Rider. So this is an alternate way to bring back anything you discard. It's not as reliable as Hela, right? Because you can't pick and choose or summon all of them. But it can be utilized early if you want to play something else on turn 6. Usually that's going to be Doctor Doom if you want to play something else on turn 6. But you can definitely use Ghost Rider, summon something, maybe an Infinaut, and then just say, okay, I want to have the reliability of a Doctor Doom instead. So definitely a very, very good tool. Next up, we have Lady Civ. So this is a core piece. It consistently removes a powerful piece for the archetype. You have to be careful, of course, with all your discard tools to make sure that you've reduced the chance it hits the Hela specifically. But we do have ways to mitigate that, and it's definitely one of the best tools to have something in the discard pool that you want to bring back. Next up, we have Swordmaster. This is another great tempo piece. 3 mana for 6, or 3 energy for 6 is really good. And you also have a good chance of discarding a powerful bomb that you can now use for your Hela or your Ghost Rider. Next up, we have Jubilee. So Jubilee is also very good in this deck. It just allows you to get a bomb early out on the game, early in the game, basically. And it also mills your deck for more draws because if you play Jubilee, that means there's one less card in your deck, meaning that the chance that you draw the Hela is more likely. The chance that you draw something key that you need is much more likely. So a very powerful tool, something you want to take advantage of anytime you have a good setup to play Jubilee. Next up, we have Odin. So this synergizes well with a ton of your cards in your deck. Almost everything in your deck is an on reveal. There's not really any ongoings here. It's just a ton of on reveals. So Odin can do a lot. You can copy your Jubilee, copy any of your discard effects, copy any of the Hela, even if you're lucky and the Odin comes back into the Hela lane, you can copy the Ghost Rider. There's just a lot of things you can do with Odin, and it allows for many second chances. And then we have Infinaut as well. This is maybe the best bomb to discard. Bringing back a 20 power beat stick that can't be Shang-Chi is just like it's so hard to deal. It's definitely a very, very strong piece. It can be Shang-Chi technically, like if you don't have priority, but a lot of times this deck doesn't really like have priorities. But I will say, like, it can theoretically be, but it is very difficult. You have to guess. Like, there's no way to really predict where it's going to show up. So it's tough, essentially. So, yeah, just a hard to contest card, really good to summon for free. And then next up here, or last up here, we have Death. There's just a safe card for Lady Sif to discard. Since it has that 9 energy base, if you have this in your hand and you play Lady Sif, it's always going to discard the Death unless there's been a destroy archetype opponent, or maybe the mines that could also do it. But generally, when you're going to play this, usually it's going to be the target for the Lady Sif, and it just provides good power for the board whenever you summon it back onto the field. Now let's talk about some of the discarding tools in the game. So these cards discard your powerful units, or they get discarded themselves to be played later on. There's just a couple of them we have in this particular deck. Lady Sif, Swordmaster, Blade, Black Cat. Black Cat just discards itself, while the other 3 discards a card from your hand. So these just give you more tools. You don't need to play all of them to win, but they are very helpful, and they do give you that consistency for the Hela. Next up, we have the win condition summoner. So these are not the win conditions, the bombs themselves. These are the cards that can take advantage of the bombs in your discard or your deck and just summon them earlier than normal. So they give you good tempo, good value, and they're very important for the game. So of course we have Hela in there, we have Ghost Rider in there. These summon cards from your deck, from your discard pool, from your grave, depending on how you want to look at it. And then we have Jubilee, summons from your deck. And then we have Odin in here as well as a summoner, because if you combo it with any of the 3, they'll proc their effects again, and you have another chance of summoning from your deck or your discard pile. So it's definitely something I would consider a summoner in this archetype. Now, how do you pilot this game or this deck? The early game definitely revolves around setting up for your big final turn plays. Your main strategy is discard cards, summon them back to the game. Discard cards, summon them back to the game. You need to take advantage of your discards to get the best hits possible. Now, Lady Sif is controlled and will usually hit a really powerful target. However, Blade and Swordmaster have to be more deliberate. Now, you don't have to use these particular discards. Obviously, there are more discards in the game than just Blade, Swordmaster. There's Moon Knight, there's Gambit, there's extra cards to go Colin Wing if you want. But these are the ones in this particular archetype, and you definitely have to be strategic with how you use these cards. Now, you have to be careful about 2 things here. So when Hela is in your hand, then you have to be careful with the Blade and the Swordmaster. Since it can hit any card in your hand, you have to make sure, you have to hope that it doesn't hit the Hela. And that's, maybe some of the weaknesses of this deck, where you can hit the Hela and your game is a lot more difficult. It doesn't mean it's over, but it is a lot more difficult. You have to do more hoops to have a good game setup after that. So I usually, when I'm playing this deck, I usually want an above 50% chance. Usually I'm hoping for a 66+% chance or anything above that. So if it's like a 50-50, unless it's like really necessary that I need a discard to win, I usually will wait a turn to get an extra card to draw, then go for it. So there is some strategic in when you're using your discards. That's something you have to keep in mind. And then as well, when you have Black Cat in your hand, that's always going to get discarded at the end of the turn. So if you want to have multiple discards than just a Black Cat, then maybe you want to wait until a later turn after the Black Cat has been discarded before you play your extra discard effects. Now, sometimes you don't care if it hits Black Cat because you're just trying to dodge the Hela essentially, and as long as it doesn't hit the Hela, you just get a free 4 power, 6 power on the board, and that's what you care about. Your turn 4, your turn 5 is already accounted for, so you have to play it here. Then yeah, sure, you can go for the discard. If it hits the Black Cat, okay, whatever, it's not the end of the world. But if that's not the case and you want to make sure you're having as many discards as possible, well, then you have to be careful that you're not just hitting the Black Cat. Now, Jubilee, I would say, is the optimal turn 4-5 play. If you can play Jubilee, that's really where you want to be doing it. But you have to be aware that there are some hits that could be bad for you. Either you could hit Hela too early, So if you have no discards and well, then you're already screwed. But like if you have nothing you really want, or you don't want the Hela to come out too early, well, you have to just be aware that that could happen. And then it could also hit a discard. So sometimes you might have discarded a ton, or the locations might have helped you with discarding, and you might only have the Hela in your hand. Well, Jubilee could pull a Lady Civ, it could pull a Swordmaster, and then you're going to get the extra discard. You're going to discard the Hela. That could be something to be aware of. So this is definitely a deck you have to be managing the how much cards are in your deck and what could you pull. Deck trackers are very useful for this type of deck. So just be aware of, hey, what can I pull? What would be bad for me? What would be good for me? That kind of thing. Just make sure you're controlling the likely outcomes in your head. Ghost Rider can also be used for tempo location control if needed. So let's say you discarded Infinaut early and you're just like, I want to win this on turn 4, blah, blah, blah. They can't do anything. Well, then you might want to go for the Ghost Rider just for the tempo. Even if you have the Hela, yeah, okay, you're going to get those cards anyways. But with Ghost Rider, you can force a card to be in a particular lane. And that's really hard with Hela. You can't really force Hela to say, oh, put the Infinaut in the middle, or I'm going to not play you anymore or whatever. She doesn't care. So with Ghost Rider, you can say, yeah, this is going to go here. And then Hela can use the rest wherever she wants. So it's definitely something you can think about when you're playing Ghost Rider for tempo or location control. Next up, playing Hela is kind of an art form. Like, it's not necessarily like, oh, you do this, you win. You got the discards, you win. No, Hela doesn't always give you the win, even if you have the perfect setup. And that sometimes can be very frustrating, where the summons are random. So let's say you have an empty board or empty location. Yeah, Hela can summon all the cards in that one location. And okay, well, that just messes with you up. Obviously, we have some cards that will adapt. We have Doom, we have Marvel. Those can move or affect all the lanes. So it can make it a little bit less risky, but still, it can still not work out for you, and that can be problems. So you have to be okay with that if you're playing this deck. You have to be okay of letting Hela dictate your fate. Even if you set it up perfectly for her, she might say, I don't care, everything to the right or to the left or to the back now. It really doesn't. We really don't know how Hela is going to set up the things. And I do want to mention that there are some synergies that you can do with Hela and Odin. So if you have Odin discarded, well, if the Odin procs the Hela, it can trigger her ability again. Now, in order for that to matter, the Hela has to be in a lane with a discard before the Hela triggers. So let's say you play the Hela. If you played with the Blade, if you played with the Lady Civ, if you played with the Swordmaster, well, then if the Odin goes into that same lane, it'll proc the Lady Civ again, it'll discard another card, then it'll proc the Hela again, then you'll get the card back. So I've definitely had those scenarios where you just get insane value from Hela proccing into the Odin proccing into everything again, and you just discard your whole hand again, and it's just like, that was fun, So there's definitely a lot to do here. And it's definitely something you'll understand as you play it and get better and see how to really maximize your chances of having these really crazy turns. So definitely have to keep that in mind. Now, you've discarded Hela. What do you do, right? If you've discarded Hela, sometimes you can rely on Ghost Rider to carry for you. Obviously, discarding Hela can be a big weakness of this deck, and it's definitely something that your opponents will take advantage of. Anytime you discard Hela, well, now you're going to be on the back foot. They might snap immediately afterwards. But it doesn't mean you always lose. If you're, calculating everything, you might say, oh, there's still a chance for me to win. Because just Ghost Riding an Infinaut is just strong. Like, that's not a bad play. And you still have some good turn 5 plays. You can still go like Captain Marvel on 5, Dr. Doom on 6. Like that's not horrible, right? So it's not doomed yet. It's just like it's not the I Omega win turn or a game plan that you might be hoping for. Things like Ghost Rider on an empty late, and then Odin as well. You'll get 2 summons back. Now, if you've discarded like 3-4 cards, right? It's not guaranteed that you're gonna hit a Hela, but it might put into a 50%er that you'll hit a Hela. That might be worth sticking around, especially if you've already committed a snap or something like that to go for that win percentage. So there's definitely some things you can do even if you discard a Hela. Obviously, you're going to be on the back foot. It's not a guaranteed, but it is something that you can think about. Now, what if you don't draw Hela? That one I would say is a little bit worse than discarding, because with discarding, at least there's a chance to get it back. With not drawing it at all, well, then there's not really anything you can do there. There is one tool to think about, is the Jubilee, right? So Jubilee pulls a card from your deck and gives you an increased chance of drawing your key cards. That's why Jubilee on 4 is really nice, because you're going to have more chances to get the Hela overall on your hand or on the board. Another thing that can be done is the Odin, right? Turn 6 Odin on the Jubilee gives you another pool that could hit the Hela, could be your win condition there. So there's definitely a lot to do in terms of options to try to get the Hela consistently every single game. So definitely think there's a lot of work there. As you play it, as you get better, and you know the outcomes and the odds, you'll be able to make the right decisions in more situations. Now here I want to talk about some of the powerful plays in this particular deck. One common tool is Lady Civ into Ghost Rider. You discard a big card, you summon it back down. It's just very strong, very simple. It's usually like 20 power or something even better. So it's just a very, very strong setup. Next up, we have Jubilee into Dr. Doom, the classic Electro play where you go Dr. Doom early and then Odin afterwards. With Jubilee, you can kind of do that same thing, and you play the Odin. Odin will also give you an extra card from your deck, so it's just an insanely strong setup to do. Very, very powerful play. And then next up is just the classic. You play Hela with some good discards. Lady Civ hits the death. Blade or a Swordmaster hits the Infinaut. Well, bam, you've got there, right? And then the Hela just summons everything back. You're getting a ton of value. Like it's so hard to win if you can set this up. It's so hard to lose, actually. Well, I mean, Hela will find a way, but it's hard. You're getting 20 points plus 10 points, 12 points, plus all the extra units that you've already played on the field. And usually you've played a 4-drop, a 5-drop as well. So there's just so many points down on the board when this setup happens. It's really, really good. Next up, we have some of the flex spots, the flex pieces for the meta. I wouldn't say this deck is super flexible. So I just have some alternatives, right? Blade is kind of representing discards. You could use other discards. You don't have to use the ones we have here. But I like the current ones we have, so I'm not really too focused on changing exactly what discards you have. You kind of have to mix and choose what works best for you. Then your 5 doesn't have to be Captain Marvel. It could be something like Vision. It could be any 5 that you want to play instead. But I like Marvel because if you do discard it and it gets summoned back, well, now it can move and really affect the game that way. So I generally like the Captain Marvel here, but there are other 5-drops you can use instead. And then Dr. Doom just kind of represents your big bombs. You don't have to play the exact bombs we have. It could be Hulk if you don't have anything. It could be Magneto. It could be Giganto. There are other bombs to use. These are the ones that I like so far. Here, I also want to put an alternative version that some people play, Invisible Hela. So this one definitely relies more on Invisible Woman and Modork to really discard all your cards and then summon it back on the end of the turn. There were some alternatives with like Electro and Magneto and that kind of thing, but I really just think it's already too much work with the Invisible Woman, so adding the Electro stuff is like too fancy and not that consistent. If they have a counter, they have it. I wouldn't really focus too much on I have to get the perfect this 2 drop into this, 3 drop into this, 4 drop into this, 5 drop. Like it's too much stuff into this 6. Yeah, so generally I think this is just a little bit more stock standard, simple, and really focuses on how this particular archetype works. So these are just some of the key differences, right? Using Invisible Woman and Modark, and then something all back to your board. Now let's talk about some of the flex spot options. Honestly, this deck doesn't have like too much things you want to change. You can change the early game a little bit, right? You can go Sunspawn, Invisible Women. You could, and then you have like the different bombs. I guess the major flex is like what you're gonna use in your late game option compared to what you're gonna use in the early game option. Because your early game is discards. That doesn't really change. Your late game is more the where you have options. You can go Giganto, Vision, Hulk, Apocalypse. You can also go Hellcow, Dracula. Dracula being a discard themselves, it's not one that really takes advantage of the Hela engine, but maybe if you're running Apocalypse, then the Dracula could be something to take a look at. And then Hellcow just gives you 2 discards for the price of 4 energy. Next up, right, you could also use Swarm if you want to have a little bit more tempo there. If you discard the Swarm, well, now you can play them down instead of having to wait for Hela to do it. And then Moon Knight Gambit also efficient discards. Electro can be utilized if you are going for the invisible Hela way, where you're going to go Mr. Invisible Woman into Modark into Hela. Well, then Electro can be something you can do there. Magneto is just another big card. She-Hulk's another big card. Hela Carrier is another big card. That also gives you more tools to work with. And Iron Man is another big card that just doubles your big bombs. It can be a little bit RNG with Hela because you don't really get to choose where the Iron Man goes. So the Iron Man could theoretically go into an empty lane. Obviously, if you're playing Iron Man, you wouldn't have an empty lane. Hopefully, you would just make sure that there's something in every lane so that there isn't an empty lane for Iron Man. But it is something you have to be aware of, that you play a little bit differently if you are using Iron Man. Now let's talk about some of the alternatives to some of the core cards. You could see that there were a lot of like cards I put in core, but the main strategy is Hela plus discard plus bombs. Now the discards you choose don't really matter. Like it doesn't really mean you can't play Hela if you don't have a particular discard. It just means that it affects how safe your discards are, and the bombs also affect how good the payout is. Now you don't have to use Dr. Doom, you don't have to use Death, but if you don't have Death, right, the Lady Sif now can hit the Hela more, so you have that risk associated. If you're not using, Infinaut and whatnot, well, then you don't have that huge 20 power payoff. You might have a different power payoff, or you could use Magneto. Maybe the move is something you're looking for, or it's better into the matchups, that kind of thing. The key thing is you do need Hela. Obviously, if you don't have Hela, you can't do it. But you also just need to have the pieces of Hela plus discards plus bombs. If you don't have discards, doesn't work. If you don't have things to summon that make sense, also doesn't work. So you have to have that core piece. What you use for those pieces don't really matter too much in making the deck work. Obviously, it doesn't matter like how efficient the deck is, but it doesn't matter. Like you can still play Hela without any of the other pieces theoretically. Now, when to snap? When do we snap? Obviously, the major time of snapping is when you have Hela in your hand. You have at least 2 good discarded bombs. So you play Blade, Lady Civ. You get 2 good discards. You have Hela in your hand. Good to go. Also, before Jubilee, if it makes sense, and before Odin, if it makes sense. So these ones aren't as easy to analyze that, you play Jubilee, it's snap every time. Not necessarily, right? So if you're looking and you're like, ooh, there's like a good chance I hit a discard, and the discard, I only have Hela in my hand. Well, maybe you don't want to. Maybe you shouldn't play the Jubilee in the first place, but maybe you don't want to snap. But normally I say if you're playing Jubilee, you have to trust the deck and snap before it. But here, there's a lot of other things to account for besides just, I play Jubilee. So you can't just always snap there. Same thing with Odin, right? Odin can do the same thing. You can Odin into a Jubilee into something, right? And if it makes sense, like, oh, there's like a 50% chance I'll hit the Hela from the Odin, well, that might be good enough to risk it for the win, right? Get more cubes. So you just have to be aware of the percentages and aware of your setup, and then making sure that if you are going to invest in the snap, that it makes sense. And then Hela makes it easy. If you have Hela and discarded bombs, it's very solid. Now, what are some of the weaknesses of this list? Well, the consistency, I would say, is the main issue. I would say in weaknesses here, where you're not always going to have perfect discards. You're not always going to have perfect draws. You're not always going to have Hela in your hand. You're not always going to have Hela not discarded, right? Discarding Hela, Kek W, that's definitely a big weakness. The deck itself can make you lose, essentially, and that's really sometimes a problem, where some decks don't have that issue at all, where if you're playing the deck, you're not going to lose. Where with this deck, just playing it out could make you lose. So that is a pretty big weakness. Smart Cosmos, smart Goose usage, smart counter deck usage can definitely mess you up, right? Cosmo will ruin all of your discards, so that could be really bad. And then Goose will kind of deny your particular lane, right? There's a world where someone storms you, and then Goose is another lane, and then the third lane is just unplayable by the location. And then you're just like, okay, well, I can't do anything. So there are some weaknesses there. And then you have no control of the Hela summons. We talked about this a little bit earlier, but the Infinaut and everything could just go into one lane, and then there's no, you just win that one lane that everything goes into, right? Could very easily happen. So that can mess you up. There are worlds where you get everything perfect, but then Hela itself screws you over, and that feels really bad. But it is something you have to understand with this deck. It's a casino. The wins are great, but the losses can also be very, very frustrating. So definitely be aware of that. And then Leech in general just shuts down your Hela. Means you can't summon everything. Just a very annoying card. So Leech could also just ruin you. So that's something to be aware of as well. So those are some of the weaknesses with this particular list. Let's talk about some of the example builds here. We have the first one. So this one uses Morbius. This one uses Call in the Wing, uses Gambit, Moon Knight. So it has a lot more discards, right, compared to the normal list here. And the payoffs are still the same, right? We have the Ghost Rider Hela, we have the Odin, and the Infinaut, and the Jubilee. But we are running Magneto instead of Doctor Doom for a big payoff. And we still have the Morbius for something the Call in Wing can discard, but also just a nice, good tool to have here. So that's definitely something you can run if you want to. You want to run more discards, it's definitely perfectly fine. Next up, we have, this is very similar to the standard list, except it's running Sunspot now. It's also running Giganto and not really running Doctor Doom, but this is more like, hey, I have Sunspot, I want to have a little bit more early game. Feel free to do that if you think you'd rather have a little bit more in the early game than in the late game. Next up, we have a Lockjaw variant. So here, we're adding Lockjaw. We still have a lot of discards. We're also adding Modork in here. So this can just be a big Hela cycle casino thing where you're just discarding over and over. We have the Apocalypse, so that even if you play Lockjaw and then you go discard into discard into discard into discard, well, at least the Apocalypse will just absorb that engine. So it's definitely another way of playing Hela. It's definitely a little bit more Modork discard, I would say, compared to Hela, but it does have Hela in there and you can utilize it in a similar fashion. But I'll definitely say this is more of a regular Modork discard, which I have made a video about more than Hela discard. Next up, we have just a classic discard deck, but we do now have Hela in there as well. So it utilizes Hellcow, it utilizes a lot of early discards, but you have the Hellcow Dracula Apocalypse combo to just kind of give you a little bit more of a secondary win condition besides the Hela. Dracula can definitely hit Infinaut. It can definitely hit Apocalypse. It could do a lot of work that way. You still have the Ghost Rider and everything else, but it just adds in an extra way of winning the game besides just Hela. And then the last one is a little bit more of a, I don't even know. It's an Agatha list essentially. That's what I want to mention. This is an Agatha list that could work. Kind of has that same game style where you're trying to discard the Agatha and then do whatever from there. So it's a little bit more RNG. I wouldn't necessarily say Agatha lists are particularly good or particularly strong, but I haven't really showcased an Agatha list at all, mostly because I'm not a big fan of Agatha for like a competitive circuit. But I do think like this is an acceptable Agatha list. So I saw it, I was like, okay, this could do work. And some people always ask me, hey, where's my Agatha? And I'm just like, here you go. Here's an Agatha list. I think this one is okay. So definitely something you can work with. But overall, Casino Hela is definitely one of my favorite archetypes. I definitely like using it. Play it decent amount on stream. And we do have pretty good success with it. So I had a lot of fun making this guide. Sometimes some of the other guides are like, ooh, I don't exactly know what goes here, but this one I was like, yep, this goes here, this goes here. it was not too hard. So hope you guys enjoyed it. Take care of yourselves and have a wonderful rest of your day. I'll see you in the next one.
Educatedcollins snap. Once you watch him, you won't go back. He'll teach you tomorrow, snap. Your skills will be